The first time someone parked in my spot, I figured it was an honest mistake. The second time, I left a polite note. By the 22nd time, that same parking spot had cost my neighbor several $1,000s and his entire garage access. And honestly, even now, 8 months later, I still wonder why he just couldn't stop. So let me back up a little, because the whole thing started in a way that felt almost boring at the time. I live in a mid-rise apartment building just outside downtown Portland. Not fancy, but nice enough. Brick exterior, underground garage. One of those places where the leasing office always smells faintly like vanilla candles and printer ink. The kind of building where most people keep to themselves. Young professionals, a few couples, the occasional grad student who walks around with a backpack full of philosophy books. And parking in this area? Well, it's a nightmare. Street parking fills up before sunset. And if you come home late, you're pretty much guaranteed to circle the block like a confused Uber driver for 20 minutes. So when I moved in 3 years ago, I paid extra for a reserved garage spot. Spot C14. I picked it specifically because it sits right next to the elevator entrance. I work late shifts at a hospital lab, sometimes getting home close to midnight. And when you've been staring at blood samples and fluorescent lighting for 10 hours straight, the last thing you want to do is wander around a dark garage searching for parking. For the first 2 years, it worked perfectly. I'd come home, roll down the ramp into the garage, turn the corner, and there it was. C14, waiting like a loyal little square of concrete just for me. No stress, no drama, until a guy named Tyler moved into the building. I didn't know his name at first. All I knew was the car. Black Dodge Charger. Loud exhaust. The kind that announces itself 3 blocks away like it's auditioning for a Fast and Furious movie. The first time I saw that car sitting in C14, I actually laughed a little. I figured some new tenant just got confused. It happens. So I parked in visitor parking that night, and the next morning before heading to work, I grabbed a sticky note and wrote, "Hey, this is a reserved space. Spot C14 belongs to apartment 508. Please don't park here again. Thanks. Friendly. Simple. No attitude." I stuck it under the windshield wiper and went about my day. Problem solved, or so I thought. The next night, I pulled into the garage around 11:40 p.m., turned the corner, and there it was again. Same charger, same spot. At first, I just sat there in my car for a minute staring at it like maybe the universe was glitching, because the note was gone, meaning he had definitely seen it. I remember muttering to myself, okay, maybe he just forgot. So again, I parked in visitor parking, and the next morning I stopped by the leasing office. Melissa was working the desk. She'd been there since I moved in, super friendly, always wore these oversized sweaters like she just walked out of a coffee shop commercial. I told her what was going on. She nodded in that slow customer service way and said, "Yeah, we've had that happen before with new residents. I'll send out a building reminder about assigned parking," which seemed reasonable. So that afternoon, everyone in the building got an email. Something like, "Friendly reminder that garage parking spaces are assigned. Please ensure you are parked in your designated spot." Great. Problem solved. Except it wasn't. Because the third night, guess what was sitting in C14? The charger. At that point, the whole thing shifted in my brain from mistake to choice. And that changes the feeling completely. I parked behind the building that night on the street and walked back through the drizzle, thinking about it the whole way up the stairs. By the time I got inside my apartment, I wasn't angry exactly, just annoyed in that slow, simmering way. So I did something simple. I pulled out my lease. Buried about halfway down in the parking section was a line that caught my eye. Unauthorized vehicles parked in a reserved space may be booted or towed immediately. No prior warning required. I remember reading that sentence twice. Then I walked down to the garage entrance. Sure enough, mounted on the concrete wall was a small metal sign. Private parking enforcement. Unauthorized vehicles subject to booting. And right underneath, it was a phone number. Now here's the thing. I'm not a confrontational person. I'm the type who returns shopping carts and apologizes when someone else bumps into me. But something about the way that Charger had ignored the note, ignored the email, just casually taken a spot I pay for every month, it rubbed me the wrong way. So I called the number. The dispatcher sounded half asleep when he answered. Parking enforcement. Yeah, someone's in my reserved space. What's the spot number? C14. Pause. You the resident? Yeah. All right. Someone will be there in about 15 minutes. And to their credit, they showed up in 17. Little white truck rolled into the garage like a pit crew. Guy hopped out with a bright yellow boot the size of a microwave. He didn't say much, just glanced at the charger, checked the space number on the pillar, then crouched by the front wheel. Click. Clamp. That yellow boot wrapped around the tire like a neon bear trap. It was impossible to miss. The guy stood up, scribbled something on a clipboard, slapped a warning sticker on the driver window, then nodded at me. Owner calls the number on the sticker, pays the fee, we come take it off. How much is the fee? I asked. $175. Then he drove off. I parked in C14. And I'll be honest, I slept pretty well that night. The next morning around 7 a.m., I woke up to shouting echoing through the garage. Not words at first, just the sound of someone very loudly discovering an expensive surprise. I walked onto my balcony and leaned over the railing. And there he was. Tall guy, maybe early 30s, baseball cap on backward, pacing around the Charger while kicking the tire like it had personally betrayed him. That's when he looked up and noticed me watching. Our eyes met for a second. He didn't say anything, just stared, then went back to swearing at the boot. That should have been the end of it. Most people would have learned the lesson right there. Pay the fee once, feel the sting, move on. But Tyler apparently decided that this was just the beginning. And 2 nights later, when I came home from work, the Charger was back in C14 again. So 2 nights after that first boot, I came down the ramp into the garage, turned the corner toward the elevator, and there it was again. The Charger, sitting in C14 like nothing had happened. For a second, I actually laughed out loud in my car. Not because it was funny exactly, more like the kind of laugh you do when something is so stupid it almost impresses you. Because at that point, the guy had already paid $175 to get that boot removed. Most people would take that as a pretty clear hint. Apparently not Tyler. I parked along the far wall of the garage, shut off my engine, and just sat there a moment watching his car like it might suddenly grow a conscience and move itself. Then I pulled out my phone, called the same number. The dispatcher answered on the second ring. Parking enforcement. Hey, it's C14 again. There was a pause. Then he said, same black Charger? I blinked. Yeah. He chuckled under his breath. All right, we'll send someone. They showed up in about 20 minutes that time. Same little white truck. Same guy with the bright yellow boot. He stepped out, glanced at the car, and actually smiled a little like he'd run into an old friend. Back again, huh? Looks like it, I said. Click. Clamp. Boot number 2. The next evening, around 6, someone knocked on my door. I opened it and immediately knew who it was. Tyler was taller than I expected up close. Mid-30s maybe. Broad shoulders, scruffy beard, wearing gym shorts and a hoodie that looked like it had seen better days. He didn't look angry exactly, more like irritated in a tired kind of way. You the guy in 508? He asked. Yeah. He jerked his thumb toward the garage. You seriously booted my car? I leaned against the door frame. You seriously parked in my spot again? He exhaled through his nose like we were both children in a very dumb argument. Man, you could have just talked to me. I left you a note. Yeah, I saw the note. And you parked there anyway. He shrugged. Parking's tight around here. I nodded slowly. Yeah, that's why I pay extra for that spot. For a moment, neither of us said anything. Then he shook his head and muttered, That's petty as hell, man. That word stuck with me. Petty. Like enforcing a basic rule was somehow childish. I shrugged back. I'm not negotiating access to something I already pay for. He stared at me a few seconds, clearly deciding whether to escalate the argument, then just scoffed and walked away down the hallway. I figured that was the end of it. Except it wasn't. 2 days later. Boot number 3. At that point, the parking enforcement guy didn't even bother asking questions. He rolled into the garage, saw the Charger, and shook his head like a mechanic looking at a car that keeps coming back with the same problem. Click. Clamp. $175. Again. And that's when the whole thing started turning weird. Because most people, after 2 or 3 boots, they stop. But Tyler didn't stop. If anything, he started getting creative. About a week later, I came home late again, rolled down the ramp, turned the corner, and the Charger was sitting in C14 backward, reversed all the way in. At first, I didn't understand why. Then I noticed something. The number C14 is painted on the concrete floor, visible when you drive past. But if you back into the space, you can't see it from the driving lane. For a moment, I actually admired the thought process. Then I noticed something else. The pillar right next to the spot. also had C14 painted on it in giant white letters. I sighed, called the number. The dispatcher picked up and said, before I even finished talking, C14 again? Yeah. He laughed. We'll send Carl. Carl apparently had become Tyler's regular mechanic in the boot department. Carl arrived in about 15 minutes, looked at the car backed into the spot, and just grinned. Trying to hide the number now? Apparently. Carl crouched down, attached the boot, then stood up, wiping his hands. That's number 4, right? 4, I confirmed. Man's keeping me employed. Click. Clamp. Another $175. By the end of that month, it had happened 5 times. 5 boots. $875. And the thing is, Tyler didn't even seem embarrassed about it. If anything, he started acting like it was some kind of personal feud. One night, I came home, and he was standing in the garage next to the Charger when I pulled in. Waiting. He watched me park, then shook his head slowly. You enjoy this? I stepped out of the car. Enjoy what? Calling the boot guys every time. I'd enjoy it more if you stopped parking there. He laughed in this short, sarcastic burst. You know, there's other empty spots in the garage sometimes. Those belong to other people. Man, you're really gonna die on this hill, huh? I looked at the bright yellow boot still clamped on his wheel from that afternoon. Seems like you're the one paying to die on it. He didn't have a comeback for that. Just muttered something under his breath and walked toward the stairwell. And honestly, if the story ended there, it would have just been a weird neighbor conflict. But things escalated in ways I didn't expect. Because after boot number 6, the parking enforcement company started recognizing my voice. I'd call and say, hey, it's C14 again, and the dispatcher would just sigh like we were co-workers dealing with the same annoying client. Carl became a regular presence in the garage. Sometimes he'd show up and say things like, let me guess, black Charger? Once he joked, at this point we should just install the boot permanently. By boot number 8, even other residents started noticing. The garage has these long concrete lanes where headlights echo and footsteps bounce off the walls. And every few days there would be that same splash of bright yellow sitting on Tyler's front wheel. People started slowing their cars when they drove past. One night a couple walking to the elevator pointed at it and laughed. Again. The boot had basically become seasonal decor. Halloween pumpkins, Christmas wreaths, Tyler's yellow wheel clamp. Then came boot number 9. That one stuck in my memory because of the phone call. I dialed the enforcement number, and before I could even finish the sentence, the dispatcher said, C14 again? Yeah. Black Charger. Yep. He chuckled. Carl's gonna start charging that guy rent. Boot number 9. Another $175. And somewhere around that point, Tyler tried something that finally dragged management into the situation. It happened late one night when I got home around midnight. The Charger was in my spot again, of course. But something else was different. The white C14 marking on the pillar looked scratched. Not completely gone, but partially scraped. Like someone had tried to peel it off. I stared at it for a second, then glanced at the security camera mounted on the ceiling. Our garage has cameras everywhere. So the next morning, I stopped by the leasing office again. Melissa pulled up the footage. And sure enough, there was Tyler the night before, standing next to the pillar with a pocket knife, trying to scrape the paint off the concrete. Melissa leaned back in her chair and just blinked. Well, that's new. What happens now? I asked. She sighed. Well, damaging property is a lease violation. Later that week, Tyler got hit with a fine from management. Not just the boot fees anymore. Now he had a property damage charge on his account too. For about 2 weeks after that, C14 stayed empty. Every night I'd come home, turn the corner, and see the space sitting there waiting like it used to. No Charger, no boot, just quiet concrete. And I thought maybe, finally, he'd learned. But then football season started. And one Sunday afternoon, everything started all over again. Football season in Portland does something strange to parking garages. Sunday afternoons, the whole city seems to shift. People have friends over, games on TV, beer coolers everywhere, and suddenly every extra parking space within 3 blocks disappears. The garage under our building usually fills up with visitors, borrowed cars, somebody's cousin from out of town. It becomes a small concrete jungle of bumper-to-bumper vehicles. So that Sunday evening, I wasn't expecting anything unusual. I'd worked a long shift at the lab and stopped by a grocery store on the way home. Nothing exciting, just leftovers and a frozen pizza. By the time I pulled into the garage, it was already dark, headlights bouncing off the pillars, people talking somewhere near the stairwell. I rolled down the ramp slowly, turned the familiar corner toward the elevator. And there it was, the black Charger, sitting in C14 like it had never left. I remember letting out this long sigh in the car. Not angry, not surprised, more like the tired exhale of someone who realizes a problem they thought was solved has quietly come back to life. I parked along the wall again, grabbed my phone, dialed the number. The dispatcher answered, and before I could say anything he said, "C14?" I laughed. "Yeah, Charger. Of course." He whistled softly. "Man's persistent. Or stubborn. Carl's on shift tonight," he said. "He'll swing by." When Carl's truck pulled into the garage about 20 minutes later, Tyler wasn't alone. 3 guys were standing around the Charger with him. Probably friends from the game. They had that loose, slightly loud energy of people who'd spent the afternoon drinking beer and yelling at a television. Carl stepped out of the truck holding the boot like a bright yellow briefcase. One of Tyler's friends pointed at it. "No way again." Carl nodded calmly. "Reserved space." Tyler looked at me across the garage like I'd personally summoned a thunderstorm. "You serious right now?" he said. I shrugged. "You know the rule." One of the friends leaned closer to the wheel as Carl crouched down. Click. Clamp. That sound echoed through the garage like a little metal punctuation mark. Boot number 12. For a moment the 4 of them just stood there staring at the boot, like maybe it would unlock itself if they looked long enough. It didn't. Eventually one of the friends muttered, "Man, that sucks." And they all wandered toward the stairs. Carl stood up and brushed his hands off. "See you next time," he said casually. I honestly thought he was joking. But over the next few months, it became almost routine. Boot number 13 happened on a quiet Tuesday morning. I was leaving for work when I noticed the Charger sitting there again. I made the call, Carl showed up, and by the time I got home that evening the bright yellow clamp was already decorating Tyler's will again. Boot 14 happened during a thunderstorm. Rain pounding on the garage entrance, lightning somewhere outside, and there was the Charger, like it had decided the weather made the rules optional. Boot 15 showed up right before a long holiday weekend. That one actually made me feel a little bad for him because the enforcement company was backed up and he had to wait nearly 2 hours before someone could remove it. But even that didn't change anything. Over the next 3 months, Boot 16, Boot 17, Boot 18. By this point, the whole building had become aware of the situation. People would walk through the garage and notice the same bright yellow boot appearing over and over on the same car. Sometimes someone would chuckle. Sometimes they'd shake their head. Once I overheard a couple near the elevator whispering, "Is that the same car again?" "Yeah. Man, that guy really hates learning lessons." And somewhere along the way, the conflict stopped feeling personal and started feeling almost absurd. Like watching someone repeatedly touch a hot stove just to confirm that yes, it still burns. Then came boot number 19. That one ended up triggering something bigger. Apparently, our building management had a policy where multiple parking violations in a short period automatically flagged a lease review. A few days after that boot, Tyler got an official warning email from management. I didn't see the email, of course, but I knew about it because he knocked on my door again that evening. This time he looked less irritated and more exhausted. "You've been reporting every single time, haven't you?" he said. "I've been calling when you park in my spot," I answered. He rubbed his face with both hands like someone trying to erase a headache. "Man, you're targeting me." I leaned against the doorway. "No," I said quietly. "I'm protecting something I pay for." He looked at me for a long moment, then shook his head and walked away without another word. A week later, boot number 20. That one happened during the Monday morning rush when everyone in the building is trying to leave for work at the same time. Tyler ended up standing in the garage waiting nearly 40 minutes for enforcement to show up while other residents drove past him one by one. Boot 21 happened late at night in the middle of winter. The temperature had dropped below freezing and Carl told me later Tyler had to stand outside the garage entrance almost an hour before someone could come remove it. And finally, boot number 22. That one turned out to be the last. Not because Tyler stopped parking there, but because management finally stepped in. Apparently, after that many violations, the building had the option to revoke garage access entirely. So one morning, Tyler went down to his car, swiped his key fob at the garage gate, and nothing happened. The light flashed red. Access denied. Later that day, Melissa told me they'd officially removed his garage privileges. No more entry. No more assigned parking. From that point forward, he had to park on the street 2 blocks away like everyone else who didn't pay for a reserved space. I saw him a few times after that, mostly passing through the lobby or carrying groceries from down the block. We never really spoke again. And honestly, the whole thing just quietly faded away. These days when I come home from work around midnight, I roll down the ramp into the garage, turn the corner, and there it is. C14. Empty. Waiting. Just a quiet square of concrete exactly where it's always been. No black Charger. No bright yellow boot. No confrontation. Just my car pulling in where it belongs. Sometimes I still think about the whole situation though. 22 boots. At $175 each, that's nearly $4,000. All because a guy refused to stop parking in someone else's spot. And I still can't decide what the strangest part of the story is. That he kept doing it. Or that he seemed genuinely surprised every single time there were consequences. So now I'm curious what you think. If you were in my position, how many times would you have called the boot company? Would you have stopped after the first one? The fifth? Or would you have let it run all the way to 22 like I did? Let me know in the comments, because I've heard some very different opinions about this one. Some people say I was just enforcing the rules. Others say I was being petty. Honestly, I'm still not sure which side is right.